Hi, everybody. Welcome today. We're excited for everybody to come in and be joining Beth Egan's breakout session titled Creating an Advertising Media Curriculum in a Rapidly Changing World. Just to give you guys a little background about Beth. So Beth is an associate professor of advertising at Syracuse University's Newhouse uh, School of Public Communication. As a 25-year veteran of the advertising industry, she has worked at several leading media agencies. She is also the author of Media Planning Essentials, published by Stukent. Beth is the communications chair of the Alliance of Media for Women in Media, a New York City affiliate, on the executive leadership team at Syracuse Go Red for Women campaign, and a New York City board member of Pencils for Children. She holds a bachelor's of science in advertising from Syracuse University and an MBA from Southern Methodist University. We're excited to hear what Beth has to offer for us today, and so we'll turn the time over to you, Beth.
Thank you very much, Brad. Good afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining. While we're not in Vegas, I think many of you probably heard or seen the meme that went around at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. Working from home is sort of like being in Vegas, where we never leave the house, you never know what time it is, and any time is appropriate to start drinking. So I guess we're kind of in Vegas a little bit anyway. When I first started thinking about this presentation and I presented the name of the topic, creating an advertising media curriculum in a rapidly changing world, I don't think I could ever have imagined how rapidly changing the world would eventually become. What I think is really interesting, though, is even though I created this in a very different environment, I hope you'll agree that a lot of the content is still very relevant, which hopefully will mean this will sort of be evergreen for us all. I left the advertising business in 2013 to come join the faculty at Newhouse. And, even in 2013, we were talking about how quickly the world is changing. And one of the things that always kind of bothered me about that conversation, I mean, obviously the world was changing very quickly in 2013, and that pace of change has only accelerated since then. But what kind of bothered me about that conversation is I think it avoided the fact that while tactics were changing very rapidly, in many ways, what we did wasn't changing. The core of what we do in the advertising industry doesn't change all that much. And that really led me to the age-old quote by Lao Tzu: give a man to fish and you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And as I started thinking about how on earth do I teach this media curriculum to a group of students in such an ever-changing environment, I really came to this core understanding of we really need to teach them how to think about connecting with consumers, how to find those connections, and leave them with the critical thinking skills. Because what they're going to be doing is going to be different by the time they get into the industry, and it's going to change constantly. And we need to prepare them for that constant state of change. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start a little bit with how I define advertising media today, because I think we can all do it slightly differently. So sort of set the stage for that. I'll share the things that I believe are staying the same and are persistent throughout whatever landscape we work within. I'm a firm believer that everything starts with a why, and I'll talk a little bit about that. There are some hard skills that are necessary to teach our students, but we also need to prepare them for this lifelong learning journey. And I'll share with you some of the tools and the methods that I use to instill that within them. So we'll start with, how do we define advertising media today? In preparing for this, I took a look back. I went back to 2008, which is really kind of the beginning of the smartphone revolution. The iPhone was introduced in 2007. 12 years ago, we were living still in a pretty standard, what we call traditional media landscape. TV was still the elephant in the room. Digital was certainly a significant portion of what we were talking about. It certainly wasn't something new, but still 87 cents of every dollar that we spent went to some form of traditional media. And we define that in the framework of television, newspaper, magazine, radio, and out of home. If we fast forward to 2020, we see that has completely flipped on its side. We now have 58% of all our dollars going to some form of digital media. I think it's worthwhile to note that TV spending in dollar terms is actually higher than it was in 2008. So TV is still important, but to a lesser degree. And really, a lot of the loss has happened with some of the other smaller media. The problem with looking at it in this way is what is digital? It's easy to say that 50% of every dollar, 58% of all spending goes towards digital media, but digital is such a big bucket, and what does that really mean? So we started really back in 2008 talking to our clients about the media in a very different way. When we're dealing with traditional formats, it was very useful to talk about the device, and I'm using device, the term device loosely, being TV, radio, magazine, mechanism, maybe we could call it. It was very simple and easy to talk about it that way. But digital kind of transcends all that. So when I talk about the different media, rather than talking about the media format, I think it's more important to look at it in the context of the advertising format, because the media format changes. If I talk about radio, am I talking about Spotify, or am I talking about an iHeart station on terrestrial radio? Am I talking about reaching consumers on Hulu, which is very, very different than trying to amass mass audiences through a traditional ABC or cable network? So if we lead with the advertising format, it makes a whole lot more sense when we're trying to identify how we're going to connect with our consumers. What media planners are really doing, in my opinion, is creating the canvas on which the campaign gets painted. So we need to lead with that format. Are we creating a sight, sound, and motion piece of communication to elicit an emotive message or emotive feeling from a consumer? It doesn't really matter whether that runs on a television set or through a connected TV device, or if that's seen on your social media feed. Within social media, the core of that ad format is it shareable? Is it likable? Is it something that consumers are going to engage with? Are we trying to reach them through that theater of the mind that we create through audio advertising, which today, again, is traditional radio broadcasts, podcasts, all sorts of different interacting? And then the last format I talk about is display. I kind of define that as two-dimensional. It's not really static anymore, because we can have rich media, banner ads, and we can have the traditional static magazine ads. So when I talk about the different media formats, I talk about them in terms of how the message is delivered via video, display, audio, and social. The problem is, what is all that going to look like in 2025 when this incoming freshman group is graduating? And that is really sort of anyone's guess. We can all try to sit and prognosticate. In fact, I was recently watching an interview we did with Erwin Gottlieb, the chairman of Group M Media, from 2015. And, again, many of the things that he said were persistent, but many of the predictions that he was making back then just seem kind of silly now, because the world has changed so much in 2025. So that's really our challenge as educators in this media landscape, is how do we prepare our students for this uncertain future? So I'm going to start with what I think are some of the things that stay the same. Certainly since the dawn of time, there are really two key things that consumers are looking for when it comes to media, and that's gaining information or being entertained. And that literally goes back to the beginning of time, whether it was drawings on the caves or the etchings in marketplaces in ancient Egypt. We're looking for information and entertainment. In advertising, we're always talking about that human truth, and these are really human truths in terms of how people look to media in whatever format. It just evolves. So we've evolved to mobile, which allows us to gain that information or that entertainment anywhere we are, or things like Netflix, which allow us to be our own programmers and really get anything that we want on demand. The other thing that we can't lose sight of as advertisers is that all of our communications is commercial communications. The other basic human truth is that as people, we will always have wants and needs. And we will always be looking for ways to satisfy those wants and needs. Again, it's just technology that's accelerating the pace of change in terms of how we satisfy that. We're now doing that much more from a keyboard than we are from a brick and mortar store, and even more today than we were 3 months ago. To remain relevant to consumers when trying to communicate around these basic human truths, it really always comes back to the power of that question, why? Truly understanding why somebody is engaging in any particular behavior at a time, at any given time. The role of the media planner has always been to make sure that the campaign gets heard. It's always been our responsibility to make sure that we're finding the right audience, getting the right message to them at the right time. And it's just become more complicated in figuring out how to do that. But again, it comes back to why. If we truly understand why someone is engaging with a piece of content in the first place, it makes it much more helpful for us to try to figure out whether that is an appropriate place and time to start to have that conversation. You can think about that in just the context of your own day-to-day life. Were we all together at ProfCon in Las Vegas, we would have had an opportunity to be networking. How many times do you walk up to a group of people and try to enter that conversation? The first thing you try to do is understand what they're talking about, and then try to find a way that you can interject and have something to add to that conversation. If you just walk up and start talking about something randomly, you're likely to get a bunch of strange looks, and they'll continue talking and ignoring you. That's what's happening to us as brands if we don't gain this understanding of why someone is with that content. With that deeper understanding, what we're really driving to is finding that synchronicity between our message and the content they're viewing. If I'm going to interrupt them, and most of advertising today is still being conveyed in a fairly interruptive way, if I'm going to interrupt the content that they're currently viewing, I want to do that in a manner where they'll be willing to stop and engage. So that deep understanding of why are they there in the first place and why would my ad be relevant? It goes back to the basic uses and gratifications theories. Then media planning comes down to all making sure that you're reaching these people most effectively and in an efficient manner through your negotiation and your budgeting outlay. All that changes is how we do that. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it really comes down to the tactics that allow us to do the job that we've been doing for decades and in some ways centuries. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about what I see as the most critical hard skills that we can share with our students that they can take out into the industry and apply really from day one. And that comes down to basic Excel skills. I often hear from my students this aversion to math or this fear of math, and I like to share with them, Excel really eliminates all of that. If you have a good understanding of how to work within Excel, then you really let the tool do it for you. I actually believe that anyone going into advertising, save maybe for the creative folks, need to have a basic understanding of Excel to help them manage both data and content as well. I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, but the rest of them really go into some of those more tactical aspects of Google, social, programmatic advertising, and the growing area of e-commerce. When it comes to teaching Excel skills, one of the recommendations I have, if your university has access to LinkedIn Learning, the best tool that I've seen is the certification prep tutorial that's taught by Jennifer McBee. It is about a 3.5 hour tutorial, so it's a little bit of time commitment, but it teaches really all of those basic skills that they need. Basic worksheet management, just getting data into cells and manipulating data ranges, managing basic tables and table formats, really basic formulas and functions, creating charts, and then it provides a practice exam for the actual Excel certification. Certiport is who we use at Syracuse University for that hard credential for their resume and their LinkedIn profile. It does come at a cost. The Certiport process is a little bit clunky, so it's a commitment on the part of the university, and it's a commitment on the part of the student, but certainly a very valuable skill for any student to walk into an interview with. I can tell you, if I could verify that a student had strong Excel skills, I would almost hire them on the spot, especially if they knew pivot tables. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the learning platform that Google has put out there. Everything in Google Skillshop is free, which is a great advantage. One of the disadvantages of Google Skillshop is they change it quite frequently. So even since I've created these slides, it's changed a little bit. They are no longer offering the Google Ads app certification. From what I could find. I usually direct my students initially to the Google Ads display certification videos. For one reason, it's the shortest certification. So with the Google Ads display, it's about 2.5 hours worth of content, including the certification exam. And I like it because it gives them a very strong basis for how digital advertising works overall within and outside of the Google Ads platform. Of course, Google is best known for search. The search certification is very valuable if you have the time to integrate that into your curriculum as well. That one's a little bit longer. That's almost 4 hours long. And all the other ones, the measurement, the video, and the shopping, again, they all range between 3 and 4 hours. So it might be difficult to get all of that into your curriculum, but they're all offered and they're all very valuable. For my data analytics course, I lean into the Google Analytics certifications. There's really two main learning paths for this: Google Analytics for beginners. I really love what they've done with the beginner course. It's a really nice combination of there's some videos, there's some text, there are some interactive knowledge checks throughout. But I think the most valuable thing in the Google Analytics for beginners is there's a dummy data set that really allows them to get into the analytics software and play around and pull their own reports. So it's very interactive and very user-friendly. And then again, based on what your course is focused on and the amount of time you have within your curriculum, of course, the advanced system is very powerful as well. So those, there are other Skillshop opportunities. Those are the two key ones that I recommend for media planning classes. From a social media standpoint, not only because Facebook is really sort of social media, but the Facebook Blueprint is the most in-depth learning platform for all the social media. Twitter has a nice little learning module, and that only takes about an hour. So it's very helpful to go through that. I'm sorry, I'm seeing the questions as they're coming through too, so I apologize. But the Facebook Blueprint is really the most comprehensive. I did see that somebody asked how long it took to go through the Google Analytics for beginner. That is about 3.5 hours, but again, that includes the certification test. So I'm finding the students don't take all of that time. For my students, that takes them about an hour less, so about 2.5 hours. So going back to Facebook Blueprint, it's much more comprehensive, and it is the last time I looked, it's $99 to actually get the certification. Facebook is presenting tomorrow, so I encourage anyone who's not familiar with the platform to go into that breakout session and get the updates on that. And again, with Facebook, it's both Facebook and Instagram. So it gives the students a really nice overview of really the basic tenets of social media marketing. The other platform that I've been engaged with for the last 3 or 4 years, really since 2015, I've been working very closely with the trade desk. Some of you in this breakout session may have had some interactions with the trade desk as well. They have just relaunched their certification program to create the Edge Academy. They have reformatted it into these very sort of focused platforms of marketing foundations. The marketing foundations certification is close to 10 hours of content. It's very, very weighty. The great news is since COVID-19, they have decided to offer their certifications for free through the end of the year. So if you're looking for some more online content as you're shifting into how you're going to manage your fall 2020 classes, this is a great opportunity to either just tap into some of those modules. Since it's free, it's easy to just pick up one or two that are most relevant to your particular curriculum, or you can lean in and have them do the full certification. It comes with a LinkedIn badge. It is a great credential for your students to have on their resume. My students have been getting certified for the past 3 years through the trade desk, and I can tell you, when they go out on interviews and talk to hiring managers, they consistently get the feedback that they know more about programmatic than most of the people within their own organizations. So it's been a really helpful certification badge for the students to go out and get jobs with. The data-driven planning gets a little bit more hardcore into the actual buying of programmatic media. So again, depending on the focus of your course, that might be something that you want to lean in on as well. Like I said, all of this is free now through the end of 2020. But the spotlights, the connected TV and the data marketplace, for now, the spotlights are both free. Somebody asked how much is it normally? They have been offering it to universities for free. So if you're interested, I can make sure that we circulate contact information for this afterwards. And they actually have a couple of folks dedicated to the academic community and providing us the content for free. The advantage of the COVID-19 offer is you could go off and do it on your own if you didn't want to interact directly with the trade desk right now, although I do highly recommend it. The certification for the industry is normally $500. So when a student's talking to somebody within the industry, it is recognized as a very well-respected tool. The last one I'll talk about is the Amazon Learning Console. Again, Amazon is just now starting to integrate with universities a little bit more. So some of you may have been having some conversations with Amazon as well. I will tell you they're new to it. So it's not as well developed as the other certifications that I've been talking about, although I think it's very, very critical It does give our students a very broad introduction to the e-commerce ecosystem overall. This one is free as well, so you can certainly just go in and offer it on your own. Although what the Amazon is trying to develop with universities is a tighter integration and offering, in some cases, guest lecturers to come into your courses. Again, with like the Google Ads certification, there you have access to some actual data. Amazon hasn't really gotten there yet, but I'm hoping that they do fairly soon, because as you all know, it's very hard. Taking the certification is very helpful in terms of knowledge base, but until you can actually get in and play with the data. You start with the sponsored ad, so that's the basic Amazon search mechanism, but there are some opportunities as you get in a little bit deeper to understand a little bit more about the Amazon ecosystem, because it isn't just about advertisers pushing out their messages. It's also about how you operate within their marketplace as well. So that's valuable for students to understand. So now I'm going to move on to sort of how do we leave them with this lifelong learning? I said earlier on, it's very, very important that we teach them the critical thinking skills. So we can teach them some of these hard skills, but they've got to understand, how do I apply this as all of this new information is coming at me? So a couple of places where I would direct you to. Of course, I will start with Media Planning Essentials, but let me explain why I have this in the lifelong section rather than the basic skills, because it's a little bit of both. But what I think is very valuable, and this is thanks to Stu Kent and how they've structured their business model, the students have access to the text for life. And I update this textbook twice a year. Each year there's one major refresh where I update all of the ad spending dollars. And as I noted earlier, I share both the traditional breakouts, because that's primarily how we do still talk about it in the industry. But I also break it out based on my constructs of video, audio, display, social, and I actually break out mobile separately. I also, in both of the updates each year, work on making sure that all of the new advertising platforms, whether it's a new way to advertise on Snapchat, or whether it's updating with all of the changes within the connected TV landscape, those are updated biannually. So the students will have access to this throughout their careers and can always come back and sort of reference that textbook, especially at the entry level when you might not want to go to a manager and ask them questions. This is a tool that they can use throughout. Before I go on to the hard skills, I just want to leave with, one of my passions about writing this book, and one of the reasons why I was really intent on doing it with Stu Kent in an online format, is because things are changing so rapidly. What we noticed with a lot of the existing textbooks, which there are some excellent existing textbooks out there, is that as new things came along, it sort of became an added chapter, which is really the only way you can manage sort of a printed document. What I try to do with Media Planning Essentials is, as things change, really integrate those changes into how the content is presented. So in this last refresh that will be live for the fall 2020 session, addressing all of these changes in connected TV. What does it mean that we now have HBO Max and Disney Plus and Peacock coming on board? That got integrated into how we buy and sell digital video sort of organically, and how the content was already presented in the book. I didn't lean too heavily into COVID in the text, but again, because this is a living, breathing document, I was able to at least acknowledge a little bit the changing landscape and how time spent with some of this media has changed. So great resource for your students from a lifelong learning perspective. The other going back to sort of hard skills, really what inspired me to write the book in the first place was this relationship that I had with Nielsen's ComsPoint influence tool. The ComsPoint influence tool is what we call a channel planner optimizer. As I said earlier, we are really more focused now on why consumers are using particular media. It's not so much about the time spent, media usage. We have to make sure that we find places where our content is going to seamlessly integrate with the context of the environment. And what media planning what ComsPoint Influence does is it looks at what media do people turn to, what channels do people turn to exert influence in different categories. So they are analyzing, I should have these numbers top of head since I just did this, but they're analyzing, I believe now it's about 65 channels. I saw somebody made the comment, there's so many different mobile channels. The beauty of this is it's an industry tool. It's what we use in the industry. So a lot of the channels that are here because clients came to Nielsen and said, I need to know how this channel performs. So it's about 60, 65 different channels. And I believe they're up to around 90 different product categories. And that's really important too, because how consumers make decisions in low involvement categories is very different than how they make decisions in high involvement categories. So in a low involvement category, media like TV or social media are going to do a really good job because those are media types where we go to receive more emotionally driven messages, and we tend to make more emotionally driven decisions in low involvement categories. Whereas if I'm in a high involvement category, I hope it's eventually web-based too. They keep telling me it will be. In a high involvement category, I'm going to lean in a little bit more on some of those channels where I have some more dwell time. And so this tool will give you that channel ranking, which is the image we're showing here, based on a specific category and a specific target audience. Again, a younger person is going to rely a lot more on messages they see in social media than an older audience may. The older audiences will rely a little bit more on the more traditional media. Before I move on to the other elements, I do have to stress that this is a channel planning optimizer. So what that means is what you see down here in the lower right-hand part of the screen is the output. It is not a flowchart planning tool. So what the students get out of it is a budget allocation across a group of channels. The other big benefit of this tool is that it's a Nielsen tool, so there's costs built in, and those costs are based on industry standard costs across all of these channels. So it was the only place I could find where I could get reliable media costs to really help my students dive into a budgeting tool. So I'm going to move on from there, so we'll have some time for questions. I'm just going to share some of my favorite sort of industry spots that I go to and explain briefly why I think they're so valuable. Wall Street Journal has long been my go-to for media, and even back when it was still just a printed newspaper, that was my go-to for the media and marketing section. Since the Walt Mossberg days, I've always found that they've had the most compelling tech editorial, so I relied on that Wall Street Journal for that. CMO Today is just an easy into all of that, so I will assign my students to sign up for the CMO Today email. The other thing I love about Wall Street Journal is they do have a nice assessment tool for universities, and that's free. So you get a weekly marketing assessment. I use it as extra credit in my class, just to kind of encourage them. And I believe the Wall Street Journal is still offering $1 a week subscription to students. So I also think it's a good way to get them into a good habit of reading something that they might not normally read. The next one, if you are not reading Ad Exchanger and you're teaching media, then when today's sessions are over, please go online and sign up for the Ad Exchanger daily email. It is the industry publication for the digital and the programmatic industry. I will tell you, if you're new to Ad Exchanger, it's a little bit like reading Shakespeare in the very beginning. It's a little hard to understand, but once you've done it for a while, you start to pick up sort of the lingo and what they're talking about. But really a must read if you're teaching digital programmatic or any data-driven curricula. I also think they have some nice podcasts. Ad Exchanger Talks kind of get into some of the important topics of the day. The big story, they try to elevate a little bit, talk to some more senior level folks, and take a little bit of a step back for the long term. And then since COVID, they've started this social distancing with friends, which is a little bit more of a casual conversation about what's happening today. Media Village, if you do have a background in the advertising media industry, you're probably familiar with the Jack Myers reports. It was a newsletter that every agency got back in the day. Jack has moved online. Full disclosure, he's a Newhouse alum as well, so I felt like I had to give him some props here as well. Media Village does a really good job of sort of curating the thought leaders, and he covers a lot of different aspects of the industry. I do want to point out his Advancing Diversity. Jack has been a really strong proponent's not even the right word. He's really been walking the walk on diversity for a really long time now. He hosts a great diversity awards event at CES every year. So as issues of diversity and inclusion are becoming even more important today, the content that you're going to find on Media Village related to that is really deep because he's been doing it for so long. Media Post, go-to for the media industry, must read for any student of media. The great thing about Media Post is they do deep dives in each one of these. So if you're teaching a course on a very specific topic, you've got a lot of great content there to cover. Or if it's just a general advertising or media course, I have my students just sign up for the Media Post Week in Review newsletter. I believe it comes in on Sunday mornings. And they're getting at least, the top line important topics that people have been talking about over the course of the week. And it was about a year ago, the New York Times started this privacy project to really kind of dive into what's happening with data, what are companies doing with their data, getting really into the tech thing. That's kind of morphed to On Tech. Again, it's a daily newsletter. But really important to stay on top of how our data is being collected and used. And then finally, the industry trade organizations. I'm sure you're all familiar with all of these. Interactive Advertising Bureau, a lot of their content and thought pieces online are free. Take a look there. They seem to slowly be starting to think about universities and the academic world a little bit. They reached out to me recently about potentially inviting some of our students to their virtual Newfront events, which if you're not familiar with the Newfronts, it's the digital advertising's answer to upfronts, which as we all know didn't really happen this year. So they're starting to get more engaged, but there's a lot of good free content there. If you don't know about this, unfortunately, there's only 2 weeks left, but post-COVID, or in the midst of COVID, I should say, the ANA has offered professors free access to their marketing knowledge database. Again, I can circulate the contact information for Elliot Lum at the ANA. Again, there's only 2 weeks left, but I highly encourage you to go in there. They're encouraging us to grab what we can. Obviously, they're hoping to engage in to get universities to sign in. I don't know if I'm supposed to be quoting this or not, but I think it's around $9,500 for an annual subscription to ANA. I know that's a little pricey for universities, it's pricey for us. I'm not sure we're going to be able to make that commitment, but talking to them about some creative ways to do that. And finally, the 4As. And again, Marla Kaplowitz would probably kill me for saying this, but I believe their annual subscription fee is around $3,000. That does get you some access to some of their research resources as well. Statista is one of them that you get through 4As, which I found to be very, very useful. So a lot of questions have been coming through. So I'm going to stop talking and let you guys ask me.
Great job, Beth. So a couple of questions to go back and answer for you. So the first one is a couple of people asked about the trade desk certification. What is the best way to contact you about getting access to that certification and the details there?
Sure. And actually, I'm sorry, I guess my email address is not on here. You can contact me at beegan@syr.edu. That's beegan@syr.edu, or feel free to link in with me. If you do try to link in, I would just ask, shoot me a quick note so I know that you were on this webinar with us.
So another question for you. Chris, he asked, why does CompsPoint treat Twitter as a standalone channel as opposed to an aggregate for social media in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure I have the right answer for you, but if you know me, I have an answer for you. I'm guessing that is client driven. That for some reason, at some point, clients had asked them to break out Twitter separately from some of the others.
And then Jim had also asked, what content do you recommend to prioritize for an intro advertising course?
For an intro to advertising course. In terms of these resources, I think, the problem with digital media is you can get down a rabbit hole really, really quickly. So I think the Google Ads display, like I said, is a really nice introduction to just generally how the digital marketplace works. The trade desk, the marketing foundations, there's some early content, so you don't necessarily have to have the students go full through the certification. They have it broken up in modules, and the first module is a really nice overview of kind of how we got here. And there are some pieces that are just very general about programmatic. Again, it gets pretty deep pretty quickly, so I wouldn't recommend that for an intro course. Then I would say CMO Today is probably the broadest from an advertising standpoint. I just want to go back real quickly to the Twitter question, just to share with you what I have told my students is that they should probably take all of the social media and just combine it together. So don't get too wedded to whether CompsPoint's telling you Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat. You can combine those. In the updated version of CompsPoint, I take you through a way to create your own classifications, which would allow you to walk the students through a way to just create a social media bucket, and then they wouldn't have to worry about the individual ones.
Perfect. So we did have one more question come in, and just so you know, Raphael went ahead and posted Beth's email address in the chat too, so you can pick it up there.
Thank you.
And we'll also put a link to where you can come in and request access to the media planning textbook if you want. So Scott's question is, are there any good ways to get students more hands-on experience with digital ad platforms and campaigns?
Not that I'm aware of right now. So, like I said, the Google Ads the Google Analytics certification does give them access to a set of dummy data. So that allows them to get in and play around a little bit. One thing that I've been doing with the trade desk, and I'm not sure how widespread they're ready to make this, but it's not a secret. They have given us access to their trade planner tool. So we were able to go in and create some programmatic strategies with the same tool that agencies use to place their programmatic buys. So if you reach out to me, I'll get you in touch with Drew West at the trade desk. Again, I'm not 100% sure how ready they are to make that widely available, but I know they'd be open to having a conversation with you.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all of our questions we have for today. So Raphael is posting that link to the textbook. If you haven't have access to it, you can go ahead and request access to it there. As Beth mentioned, it is updated twice a year. So we appreciate everyone for joining today and for the participation. And yeah, hopefully you have a good rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you, Beth. You did an awesome job.
Thank you, guys. Oh, thanks very much. Great to have you guys. Thank you.